With car sales in a free fall from the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, General Motors was losing billions and running out of cash. By the time the company closed its books on 2008, it would be in the red by a staggering $30.9 billion. Chief Executive Rick Wagner led the auto delegation in Washington, seeking government funding to save the industry and keep GM out of bankruptcy. The U.S. government spent about $50 billion to bail out GM. As a result of the company's 2009 bankruptcy, the government's investment was converted to a 61% equity stake in the Detroit-based automaker, plus preferred shares and a loan. The remainder of GM's equity stake was divided between the Canada and Ontario governments, the United Auto Workers Retiree Trust, and bondholders and other creditors. Vicki Denton died after the airbag in her 1998 Dodge Caravan minivan failed to deploy during a head-on collision. In 2009, a jury found Chrysler responsible for her death because of a manufacturing defect, awarding her surviving son and other relatives $2.2 million. The family was near collecting those damages on the eve of Chrysler's government-brokered bankruptcy. 2 years removed from a $12.5 billion bailout, Chrysler Group LLC still hasn't paid the damages and doesn't have to. The reason? The company's restructuring allowed it to wash away legal responsibility for car accident victims who had won damages or had pending lawsuits before its bankruptcy filing. The same holds true for General Motors Company, which discarded the liabilities as part of its own $50 billion bailout and restructuring. In the 2009 deal overseen by the Obama administration's Auto Task Force, Fiat, the 115-year-old Italian auto company, paid no money to acquire its initial 20% stake in Chrysler, only contributing some of its intellectual property instead. Fiat would later pay $2.2 billion to raise its stake in the company to 58.5%. Fiat paid $3.65 billion to purchase the final 41.5% of equity interest in the Chrysler Group that had been held by the United Auto Workers Retiree Medical Benefits Trust. The Ann Arbor, Michigan-based Center for Automotive Research estimated that the U.S. would have had 2.6 million fewer jobs in 2009 and 1.5 million fewer jobs in 2010 if General Motors and Chrysler had disappeared. The study also estimated the government saved or avoided the loss of $105 billion in lost taxes and social service expenses. U.S. taxpayers likely lost $1.3 billion in the government bailout of Chrysler, the Treasury Department announced. Originally, the government committed a total of $12.5 billion to the struggling automaker Old Chrysler and the company's newly formed Chrysler Group. Of those funds, $11.2 billion have been returned through principal repayments, interest, and canceled commitments, the Treasury said. A 2014 report on the auto rescue done by the Auditor General of Canada said the Canadian and Ontario governments contributed $13.7 billion to the GM and Chrysler bailouts. Canadian taxpayers will fall about $3.5 billion short of breaking even on the money the federal and Ontario governments invested in the bailouts of Chrysler Group LLC and General Motors Company in 2009. The U.S. government lost $11.2 billion on its bailout of General Motors Company, more than the $10.3 billion the Treasury Department estimated when it sold its remaining GM shares in December 2013, according to a government report. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, a $5 million grant for General Motors is now a reality. The Fort Wayne City Council unanimously approved a measure awarding the grant to the auto manufacturer, which is in the process of performing a $1.2 billion upgrade to its Allen County truck assembly plant. The $5 million grant is essentially pass-through funding from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, City Controller Pat Roller told the council. That means funding from the state will allow the city to provide the grant award to General Motors. A new deal with the United Auto Workers allows GM to hire new workers at considerably lower wages than older ones earn, which ought to reduce labor costs over time. Plus, GM's operation in China is a roaring success. At the North American International Auto Show in Detroit, General Motors officially unveiled the American version of the 2016 Buick Envision, a China-made compact SUV that is key to boosting sales. General Motors is planning to import the 2016 Buick Envision from China to sell in North America this year. The move will mark the first time one of the Detroit Three has imported a vehicle from China. Today's announcement by General Motors that they are importing the Envision from China is a slap in the face to U.S. taxpayers and the men and women who worked so hard to save GM during its darkest time. UAW President Dennis Williams and Vice President Cindy Estrada, who head the GM department for the union, said in a joint statement. Buick spokesman Stuart Fole said GM is importing the crossover from Yantai, China because it makes the most business sense for the company. Federal regulation of passenger automobiles is by far the most extensive case of government influence on a consumer product. There is no close second. Specific regulations cover almost every aspect of the vehicle, including design, production, and operation. When the departments and agencies of the United States of America own automobile producers while regulating the automotive industry, the government practices communism, no matter how temporary the experience.